So by the end of today's session, you'll be better able to understand what's assessed in a B2, C1 and C2 speaking test. We'll look at how you can apply the speaking test criteria when you're assessing your learners. And we'll also look at some activities that will help you develop and improve different aspects of your learners' speaking skills. Okay, there are guides for all the levels, so from A2 to C2. Today we're talking from about B2, C1 and C2, but if you teach the other levels, have a look on the website, you'll find those too. Okay, Claire.
All right, so we'd like you to be involved in the webinar today. We're interested in what you think and your experiences. So your first question, in the exams, the speaking exams at this level, B2, C1, C2, what is the speaking examiner looking for? So I'm thinking assessment criteria. What are they assessing? And amongst all the hellos, I'm seeing lots of fluency, accuracy. Okay, I've got vocabulary, pronunciation. Very good. All right, great. Now, let's see if we can put some of these ideas into groups. So if you've been working with the exams before, you know that the criteria are grouped. I'm showing you here one set. What is the heading for this set of criteria? So it's about the candidate being intelligible, you can understand them. It's about using stress, using intonation. So I think amongst everything in the chat, yes, that's right. Okay, it's coming through now. So this first one, pronunciation. Here's the next set. Tell me what the heading is. So this is about being able to start conversations, about replying to their partner, because the test is done in pairs or groups of 3, keeping the conversation going. Importantly, at the higher levels is opening out, widening the conversation. Right, lots of people saying interaction. That's right, so this one is interactive communication. The next one, so this is about how extended the candidate's answers are. How long can they talk for? Do they organise what they say? Is it relevant? And also about the amount of hesitation here. And many people have said discourse management, exactly right. And Sangeeta will be talking about this in more detail later. And what remains? So what about range and accuracy? What does this cover? And talking about different topics. Right, so people are saying grammar and vocabulary. You're absolutely right. So if you're preparing your learners for B2 first, these are grouped together as grammar and vocabulary. But for the higher level exams, they're actually split. So C1 Advanced and C2 Proficiency, they're separated into lexical resource, the vocabulary side, and grammatical resource as well. And there's one last criteria, which broadly covers a little bit of everything, and that is global achievement. Now, it's important that you as teachers understand how your learners are going to be assessed in the speaking exam. Of course, you need to help them get ready. You want to prepare classroom activities that are going to help them feel confident and ready for their exam so that they can do the best possible in their test. And they also need to understand what they're aiming for, where they're doing well, what to improve, and also so they can understand the specific feedback that you give them about their speaking. Now, something that's going to help you to get to grips with the assessment criteria is understanding some of this assessment terminology. So take a look at these terms on the screen and just think about this question. How confident would you feel if you had to explain these terms to another teacher? Give me a number from 1 to 5 in the chat. And while you're doing that, Sangeeta, take yourself back when you started working with exams. Did you know any of these terms?
I don't think so. I think I probably knew what an assessor was, but not even specifically to do with Cambridge exams, just generally. And that's about it. Yeah, I don't
It
really
can
know
be
anything
really
else.
confusing, can't it? And I can see a lot of range of numbers in the chat, and that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. You don't have to memorize or learn these terms, but it's useful if you understand them because it will help you work with the handbook and it will help you work with the assessment criteria as well in the guide. And you also really need to help your learners to understand the assessment criteria too. But don't worry, because you've got some help with this. So in the guides, you've got a translation, if you like, from the very technical assessment term, what we would say as teachers, and also a definition. And you've got these important parts of key terminology about assessment and teaching methodology throughout the guide. So you can refer to this at any time. Now, I mentioned the global achievement criteria before. I'd like to ask you this question. What do you understand by this term? When the assessors are assessing global achievement, what does that mean? What are they looking for? So I've seen the word overall there, overall achievement, overall performance, impression. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. This is the mark that the interlocutor, that's the examiner who asks the questions, gives the candidates. So they're quite busy asking questions, which means this mark is quite a general impression. But we need to know what's covered under it. So if we look at the global achievement criteria, let's take C1 Advanced as an example. For Band 3, right in the middle, this is what the handbook says. So it handles communication on a range of familiar and unfamiliar topics. Just look at what's in bold there. Handles communication. Now we need to understand this if we're going to understand this part of the criteria. But again, don't worry, because in the guide, we've put a short explanation of what each of these things means. So what does handles communication mean? Well, it means that the candidate can understand and talk about the topics and do the tasks. Yes, and as Albana says, can manage to have a conversation, do the tasks in the exam. Also included under this is using accurate and appropriate linguistic resources. Again, quite technical assessment language there. What does that mean? Well, this is about using the right kinds of language, so grammar and vocabulary that's appropriate for the right topics. And finally, under global achievement, it's about extended discourse that's generally coherent. What does that mean, generally coherent? Well, again, overall, is the candidate logical? Is it easy for a listener to follow? So I think if you're getting started with exams, or if you're getting started with a new level, starting with global achievement is a really good place to begin, to get familiar with this level. So take a look at the global achievement criteria, read them through, notice the difference between the bands, the marks that your candidates can be awarded, and watch one of the speaking videos. Now, I don't know if anyone has used these before, let me know in the chat, but there are videos of candidates doing the exam with real examiners. So it's good to watch that. Look at the criteria as you're watching. There are tasks for you to do in the guide to help you focus in on particular aspects of the candidate's performance. And then you can compare your ideas and your impression to what the examiner said. And this is a great base for you to start to understand what it looks like to be B2 or to be C1 or to be C2 level. And then you can start thinking about your learners and how does their performance compare. So I've shown you some of the global achievement criteria for C1 Advanced, but you've got this for all of the different criteria as well. So hope this is a helpful part of the guide, looking at the assessment terminology and then getting in plain English what this really means.
Okay, so as Claire mentioned, we're going to look in a little bit more detail at one of the criteria. So have a look at the descriptions on your screen and tell me in the chat which assessment criteria is this. Is it grammar and vocabulary or grammatical resource, lexical resource? Is it discourse management, pronunciation, interactive communication, or global achievement? Have I included all the criteria there?
Well done, well remembered.
Okay, I can see, okay, I think, yes, as you can see, most people are saying discourse management, and it is indeed. This is discourse management for B2 First, at C1 Advanced, and at C2 Proficiency. And I think it's quite useful to see them side by side and notice the differences. So this is the band 3 descriptor for each of these levels, and it's quite interesting to see how they vary as you progress up the levels. Okay, so the descriptors or the criteria, they're written for assessors, they're written for the examiners, and so some of the language, some of the terminology might need a bit more explanation, either for you as teachers, but also for your learners. So let's have a look at, let's try and decipher, let's try and work out what discourse management means. So it covers 4 main areas, which is extent. Now, an extended stretch will depend on the task. So what an extended stretch is will depend on the task. So thinking about B2 First, in part 1, that might be a couple of sentences to answer the question and give a reason or an example. In part 2, an extended stretch means speaking for a full minute. Okay, so bear that in mind depending on the task that they're doing. And also notice that hesitation is still expected at this level. Even at band 5, we expect a little bit of hesitation. Okay, relevance. So if for something for the candidate to be relevant, they need to be talking about the topics and the tasks, answering the questions and talking about the topic within the test so that they don't go off topic and talk about different things. Okay. And also notice again, it mentions repetition. Even at band 3, we expect a little bit of repetition. This is normal when we're speaking. Now, a clear organisation of ideas. This means that the candidate is able to organise what they say into a logical sequence, into a logical order that makes it easy to understand. For example, in part 2, again, that might mean they talk about similarities between the pictures together and then some of the differences, rather than jumping about and just talking about whatever comes into their head first. Then coherence. So coherence and cohesion. So cohesive devices and discourse markers, I'm going to talk about those in a bit more detail next, but just notice how at band 1, it talks about basic devices, whereas 3 and 5, we want to see a range of cohesive devices and discourse markers as well. So what do I mean by cohesive devices and discourse markers? Read the descriptions, okay, and can you tell me whether A describes cohesive devices or B? and vice versa for discourse markers. Which is which? Okay, tell me in the chat. So we're saying A, cohesive devices, B, discourse markers. Oh gosh, it's moving so fast, I can't read it. There's quite a, I think, lots of people just saying A and B. Which one is which? Okay, I think from the ones I can read, yes. So the first group is cohesive devices. So these are words and phrases which show the relationships in what we say. Okay, and if you notice the first group, and, because, but, these are basic devices. Whereas at band 3 and 5, we would expect to see more sophisticated cohesive devices like as a result, on the other hand, however, okay? And then group B is discourse markers. And these are words which add extra meaning to a conversation. Words like actually, or you know, or well. So these are discourse markers, all right. So we'd like to give you some examples of what you might see at bands 1, 3 and 5. Claire and I are going to be candidates. So first, just read this extract. We're going to focus on creating cohesion. So we're going to focus on cohesive devices and discourse markers. Notice the difference between the bands. Notice the difference in the descriptions, okay? So imagine we are doing part 3 of the B2 First for Schools speaking test. And we're talking about how important different ideas are for students to feel happy at school, okay? So as you listen, decide if Claire is giving an example that's more like band 1, band 3, or band 5, and tell us in the chat. Claire.
I don't like rules because they're boring.
Okay, do we think this is more like band 1, 3, or 5? Okay, straight away lots of 1s, a couple of 3s. Okay, mainly 1s, Claire. Okay, next one.
I think the least important one is school rules, as I don't see them helping with the students' happiness.
Okay. So do you think that was an example more like at band 1, band 3, or band 5? Oh, your scores are going up now. Okay, we've got some 3s, some 5s. 3 to 5. Okay. Next one.
The first one to discuss is probably school rules, since they impact on us the most.
I'm not sure.
Well, what I mean is you have to follow them, you know? You don't have a choice.
Okay. Yeah, you're getting a lot more 5s now. 5, 4, now. 3. A 33, I think that was. But definitely your scores are getting better. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your ideas. Let's talk about the differences. So at band 1, we saw an example of a basic cohesive device, because. At band 3, we see a range of devices. So we have as, the connector as, but we also have grammatical language, pronouns, helping to create connections and connect what we're saying. At band 5, again, we have pronouns, one, since, the connector there. But we also start to see these discourse markers like, well, you know, adding a bit more meaning to that conversation, okay? So we've talked about bands 1, 3 and 5 because this is what's described in the criteria. But remember, your learners can also get a 2 or a 4 or even a 3.5. So for those in between bands like band 2, what you'll see is aspects of band 3 and some aspects of band 1 together. And so that will give you band 2. Same for band 4. All right. But I think the easiest thing at this stage is to focus on the descriptors and focus on 1, 3, and 5. So the examples we've given you, now obviously this is just a very tiny example. When you're listening to your learners, you'll be listening for this throughout their speaking test or throughout their performance. And we've given you examples like this for each of the levels, so in each of the guides, and also for each of the different criteria. So look out for the boxes like this to give you an idea of the kind of thing you're looking for when you're listening to your learners and also watching the speaking test videos. Okay. So now it's your turn to be assessors. We're going to focus on discourse management and B2 first, part 2 of the speaking test. So this is where they talk about pictures. So how do the discourse management criteria relate to part 2 specifically? I'm going to give you an example. So an extended stretch in part 2, what does this mean? So this is speaking for a minute. In part 2, an extended stretch is a full minute. Okay, your turn. Tell me in the chat, it's relevant if the candidates what? What do they need to do in part 2 of B2 first to make their answer relevant? Oh, immediately, great answer from Susanna. Yes, lovely. I can see compare and contrast, compare the pictures, justifying, that's important. Yeah, comparing elements, speculating, absolutely. I think these are all really, really good ideas. So it's relevant if they answer the question and compare the pictures. Okay, another one for you. The candidate uses a range of cohesive devices, such as, what kind of cohesive devices might you expect to see in part 2? Okay, whereas, while, lovely. On the other hand, nice, however. In contrast, yeah, lovely. For instance, yeah. But, while, yeah, exactly. We want to see a range, so basic ones like but, as well as more sophisticated ones. So I've given you some examples, but I think all the examples you're giving me in the chat look absolutely brilliant. The first picture, on the other hand, in the same way. All of these are the kind of things you might expect in part 2. Okay, now we're going to watch Julia give her part 2 long turn. I've put the criteria, the discourse management criteria on the screen. As you're listening, tell me in the chat if you think Julia should get a score from 1 to 5, or which score would you give her from 1 to 5?
Julia, it's your turn first. Here are your photographs. They show people spending time in the mountains for different reasons. I'd like you to compare the photographs and say what you think people are enjoying about spending time in the mountains, all right?
Okay, so the first picture shows a group of kids and I think one adult who are skiing. Maybe they live near the mountains and they are on a school trip. The second picture shows 3 people, but they don't seem to be together, they don't seem to be a group. The first, the one in the middle is a woman who is like staring at the mountains that are in front of her, and the other guys seem to be like going back. As for the weather, in the first picture it seems to be very cold, of course, because there is snow and they are like their clothes show that. Well, in the second one, it still seems cold. It's not warm, but it's not as cold as the first one. And I think that people are enjoying about spending time in the mountains is that on the first one, maybe, as I said, they're on a class trip and they are learning a new sport or just having fun with their classmates. Well, on the second one, maybe they are on a trip and getting to know new places.
Thank you.
Okay, quite a range of scores I could see coming through in the chat. It seemed early on the scores were lower, then they kind of got a bit higher. So I'm going to give you a bit more help. We're going to look at the examiner comments. Now, I think most of you were sort of at the upper end for Julia. So I've put the criteria for band 3 and for band 5 on the screen. Let's look at the examiner comments and see if you can connect them to the criteria. Do you want to change your score based on what the examiner says? So she exhibits good extended language with very little hesitation. All her contributions are relevant. I can see lots more 4s and 5s now. She has a clear organisation of ideas, and we get an example. And she uses a range of appropriate cohesive devices and discourse markers. And again, we get some examples of the things that she said. Okay, so yeah, lots of really nice scores for her. She actually got 4.5 for discourse management. Now, I've just seen it, perhaps 4.5, bang on. Now, remember, her score is based on the whole of her test, and we've only seen part of her part 2, okay? But I think this is a good example of a good level of discourse management. So if you're in that higher range, then very well done, all right? So the activity that we've just done is taken from the speaking guides. And I just wanted to say, because I know lots of people are coming in a bit later, there's lots of people here today. Everything we're talking about today, you'll find in these speaking guides, all the activities you'll see there, and we'll give you the link at the end. The activity we've just done is in the speaking guides, and there are activities like this with step-by-step instructions for you for each of the different criteria. There are also handouts and worksheets that you can use with your learners, as well as tables like the one that Claire described earlier, to help you use the speaking test videos and help assess the candidates for the different criteria. So it helps you focus on the different aspects of the criteria and get used to what we're talking about when we say discourse management or interactive communication and what that means in terms of speaking skills. Now, when we are assessing our learners or when we're developing speaking skills, we need to give them feedback which helps them to be better communicators. So tell me what you think about this question. Do you usually give more feedback on what your learners are doing well or on how they can improve? Okay, immediately, both. Both. Okay, 50-50. Both, but more to improve. Okay, so a variety. I think most of you are saying, oh, it depends. Yeah, definitely. So this is from John Hattie. Feedback on correct responses is more effective than feedback on incorrect responses. So I think, as you're saying, it's as important to highlight what our learners are doing well, as well as giving them ideas for how they can improve, okay? So we must balance their successes as well as areas for improvement. Our feedback needs to be actionable as well. And by that, I mean that we need to give specific examples of what they're doing well so they can do it better. For example, I heard lots of nice language for speculation, such as, They might have decided to do this activity to get fit, okay? We also need to give specific examples so that they can improve, such as try not to leave long pauses. If you need thinking time, say something like, oh, I haven't really thought about that before. Okay, so focusing on specific areas and giving them ideas to keep doing things well or to improve next time. Make sure you give feedback on the different aspects of their speaking. So over the course of your lessons, cover the different criteria. Don't try and do it all in one lesson. Focus on one or two different aspects, but make sure over a period of time, you're covering the different criteria. Set success criteria before you do a speaking task. Now, this means telling your learners what you're going to be listening for. For example, if you are listening for how effectively they organize their ideas, or how well they start conversations, if you tell them before the task, it allows them to focus on that and they've got a better chance of doing it well. So finally, use the criteria. Have the criteria with you when you're listening to your learners or when you're watching speaking test videos. And that way it will help you to relate what you're listening to what's in the criteria. Don't be afraid to keep it with you. Examiners do it. Keep the criteria there and you'll just get used to what the descriptions mean related to what you're hearing, okay? And so as I mentioned before, everything we're talking about today, all of our tips are in the speaking guides. Throughout the guides, you'll see these focus on feedback boxes, which give you tips and advice on providing effective feedback in general and also in relation to the specific speaking criteria. Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sangeeta. I saw so much love for that activity and everybody saying, where's the handout? Can you send the handout? I want the resources. Don't worry, everyone. You are going to get in an email after the webinar next week a link to the resources that we're mentioning today. And we'll also, if you're ready, we'll share a QR code right at the end so you can go straight to the speaking guide for the level that you're teaching, okay? And Sangeeta has looked at one of the criteria in quite a lot of detail, but I should say that there are activities for each of the criteria as well, along with a video task and teaching ideas, and some nice little speaking activities that are not exactly like exam tasks, but they do help learners to develop their speaking skills in particular areas. And that's what I want to look at for the last part of the webinar. And we're also going to look at some specific tips for some of the different criteria. But I thought we'd start with a question from a teacher. So what would you say to this teacher? She's thinking about pronunciation. Do I really need to do pronunciation drills at B2 and above? Seems a bit patronising. What do you think? Let us know in the chat. And Sangeeta, I wanted to ask you, what do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, I love pronunciation drills. I think they're really useful, but I think it's how and when you use them. Think about when you're using them and use them when necessary.
Totally agree. I think let's not count them out just because they're high level. Students still need help with pronunciation, but we might not do it as automatically as we do at lower levels. And I can see similar advice in the chat, so thank you. I also saw a teacher who said, I have the same question. Well, there are questions like this, again, throughout the guide, along with tips and advice to help you to think about these questions. And a bit more detail on this, I would say, listen for the particular problems your learners are having and then try to address those in whatever way your learners need. So it could be drilling, it could be focus on a particular sound, it could be listening and distinguishing different words. So I hope that helps. And keep looking at the advice in the chat, really fantastic. So pronunciation is crucial, as Susan says, and one of the activities in the guide to help with pronunciation is this one. It's a schwa hunt. A schwa hunt. Sangeeta, what is a schwa?
So a schwa is what I call the lazy sound. It's this sound, and it's always unstressed. And apparently it's the most common sound in the English language. I read that somewhere.
Okay, great info, thank you. Someone else said lazy sound in the chat as well. So I wanted to just show you in this word, pronunciation, it's the shun where we hear that schwa sound. And here's the activity that your students would do. I'd like you to do it as well, so please be ready to put in the chat. Look at the phrase, say it out loud. You have to say it to hear the sounds. Don't worry about your husband or wife or family or whoever's in the room. Can you say this out loud? Sangeeta, could you say it, please?
Yes. It's a bit of a puzzle. It's a bit of a puzzle.
All right, how many schwas are there? Where are they? Which words are they? Which words are unstressed? So this is quite an interesting example because I think we often focus on stress, and that's important too. But I think particularly at higher levels, we want learners to be producing more natural sounding speech. And this is where identifying which words have the unstressed sound and then getting them to copy that can be really helpful. All right, I've got everything from 2 to 6. So here's the reveal. We've got a bit of a puzzle. Okay, so if you got that right, well done.
I think Andrea got it spot on.
How about this one? So could you say this, Sangeeta?
Okay. There were complications. There were complications.
Nice. So how many in this? All right, so I counted 2. We've got w, that was us unstressed, and complications. So the shun sound is usually a good bet, isn't it? So quite a fun activity. You might follow this with some drilling if some problems come up, but why not try that with your students? Okay, let's move to another criteria now. I'm going to show you a few tips and they all relate to one of the assessment criteria, but which one? So doing lots of pair and group work, what does this help with? Setting a clear goal for discussions. Again, what do all these tips relate to? Okay, we've got lots of code. We've got IC in the chat, so I'm guessing that means interactive communication. Really nice. So things that help with this is lots of practice, but also teaching some functional language and phrases. So the activity we're going to do is about disagreeing politely. Now, I would do this with learners who know each other a little bit. That's important because they need to know a little bit about each other, and also they need to be able to judge carefully and be sensitive to the other person. So what we don't want here is people saying rude or inappropriate things, all right? So I would use this with the class who know each other quite well. First of all, brainstorm the phrases for disagreeing politely. Think of some nice high-level phrases, B2 and above, and you can put these in the chat if some of them come to mind now. So once your students have thought of some phrases, you'll have a partner. Think of some things that you think your partner would disagree with. And again, not big political questions, but everyday things. Again, you need to be sensitive. Okay, and we've got some lovely language in the chat there. Now, me and Sangeeta prepared this, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have a quick chat about hobbies and free time activities, and we're going to disagree with each other politely.
Of course.
Okay, do you want to start, Sangeeta?
Well, do you know what I think, Claire? I think you can't really garden in hot countries. There isn't enough rain.
Well, it's true, there's not a lot of rain where I live in Cyprus. However, if you make sure you give your garden enough water, you can have lovely roses, like I do.
Ooh, roses, oh, that's interesting. Nice.
Now, I was thinking about exercise in free time, and I thought about doing yoga, but it's just for young people.
Now, many people think that. However, my grandmother was doing yoga into her 70s and 80s. So I think it actually can be a really nice activity for at any age.
Wow, amazing, Grandma, amazing. And I've seen, thank you, Sangeeta, end of demonstration. And I've seen in the chat some really lovely examples of language. That's
Yeah.
great. Hopefully your students can come out with these. And if they don't, it's a good time to put them in before the speaking activity, have them on the board to remind them to use them. Really nice. Okay, we're going to look at one more. So again, read the tips, decide which criteria do they relate to. So these are tips for you. So if you present new vocabulary in a context, it will help your learners develop this. Encouraging, there we go. The clue there is the word vocabulary, I think, written throughout the tips. So it's about analysing vocabulary. I sometimes call it mining a text for really digging out some of the lovely vocabulary in listening or reading. Great, well identified. And of course, the last one, recording and reviewing vocabulary, is really, really important so that this can move from receptive use to productive use. And actually, that's what our last activity does. So let's show you the last one. This is for lexical resource for high levels. And this one is called Mind Map Challenge. Now, if you haven't heard of mind map, it's like the picture on the board where you think of a topic and then brainstorm words or phrases around it. And I'd like you again in the chat to think of some nice high-level words, phrases. I want some phrasal verbs, some nice collocations that you could use to answer this question. So what can you use a computer for? So let's see some nice examples of high-level language for talking about computers. Okay, your learners would do this in groups, but they make their mind map individually. Then when everyone is happy with their lovely high-level vocabulary, the students take it in turns to speak for 30 seconds, trying to include as much of their high-level vocabulary as possible. Okay, the other students listen, and if they hear one of their words or phrases mentioned, they'll tick it off. So you can listen to Sangeeta now, see if she says any words that you thought of, and I'll do the same. Off you go, Sangeeta.
Okay, so a computer is pretty invaluable in the modern world, and you don't really need a state-of-the-art device. A basic laptop or desktop is sufficient for doing everyday tasks like looking up information, searching the internet. It's particularly useful for formatting documents and working with spreadsheets. I think a computer has really been a game changer in day-to-day life.
I'm going to stop you there, Sangeeta. I know you'd like to talk for much longer about the uses of computers. Did Sangeeta say any of your words or phrases? Well, you would continue this activity in the group each time the learners are listening out to see if their partner said any of their words and phrases, but also you've probably noticed Sangeeta used some other language. I had some lovely phrases there, state of the art. I didn't write that down. And this is where this activity is gold, because afterwards learners get together, they look at each other's mind maps, and then they can steal from some new words from each other, and this way they broaden their vocabulary. And once your learners get used to this activity, you'll find they can be very clever, and they like to look for very, very grand and obscure vocabulary, which is great, so that they can make sure they're the only ones who have those words. And actually, you did say one of mine.
Oh yes, what did I say?
Formatting documents.
Ah, yes.
So yeah, the other ones you didn't say. All right.
I think it's a really nice one though, because it forces you to think around the topic and not just about computer language, but other ways that you can get nice vocabulary in. And I think that's really important in the speaking test, thinking a bit more broadly about how you can get in that really nice vocabulary and phrases.
That's it. And I think that's where sometimes learners are worried, like, what if I don't know a lot about the topic?
Exactly.
Well, you know, it's all the other phrases that aren't necessarily topic specific that are also going to add to your mark as well. Okay, so we've just shown you a few activities there, but there are many, many more in the guide for each of the different criteria.
Okay, so what are you going to do next? Let's have a think about what we've done so far and what is the next best steps for you. So we have looked at what's assessed in a B2, a C1 and a C2 speaking test. We've seen how you can apply the speaking test criteria when you're assessing your learners. And we've also tried some different activities to help develop the various aspects of speaking skills. So let's take a moment just to reflect and think about how confident do you feel about assessing your learners? How confident do you feel about developing speaking skills? And what would you like to know more about? For example, if you feel at this point you want to get a better understanding of the criteria, you can look up the key terminology or look at the different examples of differences between the bands. Perhaps you want to provide better feedback. So you could look up tips on specific actionable feedback and what that is and how you can give your learners effective feedback. So all of these ideas you will find in the speaking guides. So the QR code on your screen now will take you to the preparation page where you can find all 3 guides that we've talked about today. So if you go to the Cambridge English preparation page, click on the level of the exam that you teach. Oops. Something's not moving. Oh. Okay. Click on the level that you teach. Click on Teacher Essentials. And then you'll find the teacher guides, all of the speaking guides listed under teacher guides. Okay. And as I say, the QR code will take you straight to that preparation page. So thank you so much for all your participation, all your lovely answers. There's been some great things in the chat. It's moved so quickly. We haven't been able to address everything, but thank you so much.
Many thanks for such an interesting session, Sangeeta and Claire. Now, let's look at some questions because we have many, many questions. As we've said before, we'll try and answer as many as we can. This is a very interesting one. I was wondering how you could adapt the picture task in the first for schools exam for visually impaired students. Any ideas?
I mean, this did happen to me once as an examiner, but it's not for the examiner to do. It's actually done through the exams team before the candidate arrives for the exam. So this would be something the candidate would raise with the centre beforehand, and they would then talk about, you know, how they can best meet that candidate's needs. And because there's many different special needs that a candidate might have, right? Just one example, the exam I did, they had special large print for some of the instructions and a bigger picture for the comparison task, but there are different ways to do it.
Exactly, and that's when we say, please contact your center as soon as possible. Very good. Are speaking examiners for levels B2, C1, and C2 supposed to be native speakers of English?
This is an interesting question. No, they are qualified speakers of English. They're qualified examiners. They have, usually a C2 level of proficiency, but they are qualified to examine at the level that they're examining at. They don't need to be. As teachers, do you need to be a native speaker? No.
Okay. We have a question about paper-based exams. Again, that's another question for your center, please. How does Cambridge eliminate the subjective component of the interlocutor?
Well,
Well,
go on, Claire.
I mean, yeah, so talking in general, the examiners are very, very highly trained. Those of you that have done examiner training know how much training you do and how many candidates you watch and listen to and practice, and they are monitored to make sure they're doing their jobs properly. So no one is becoming an examiner without Cambridge being really sure that they're doing a good job. So I think in terms of quality assurance, Cambridge is working extremely hard to make sure that examiners are assessing really accurately according to the criteria.
I think it's also important to remember that you have two examiners. So the assessor is sitting at the back listening really carefully, and they're giving the 4 or 5 specific marks. And the interlocutor who's managing the test and talking to the candidates, they just give that one overall mark for global achievement. So I think both the combination of the marks, but also the fact that the interlocutor just gives one general mark and the assessor is the one listening very, very carefully to the different criteria. I think that's also important too.
I saw a comment from a different Andrew on, I think, saying it's not an exact science though. You're absolutely right. And every time we mark a piece of writing or assess a piece of speaking, we are using our judgment. And that's what the examiners are asked to do as well. But they are trained really, really well.
I think it's really interesting though that once you start to get used to the criteria and you start to tune into what the level and what the bands equate to, you do start to get it right, as it were. So you're absolutely right. There's no exact science, but it's also not subjective and it's not random. Like you really do start to tune into what band 4 at level C1 sounds like.
Lovely. There's a question in the chat about somebody who's very excited about the possibility of becoming an examiner. Please, if this is the case for anybody else, contact your center, okay? Sangeeta, I think this was something you mentioned about how the lexical universe expands when we're talking about these levels. So there's a question from David Esteban about how about pet words? Where would they belong?
I don't know what a pet word is.
You know, when you use, like, I used to call my son Sweetie Pie, Honey Bunch.
Oh.
That sort of word.
I mean, I think the important thing to remember is that if it's relevant in the context of the task, then it's appropriate. I'm trying to think how you would fit a pet word into answering the questions.
Definitely interlocutor, I would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't speak to the examiner like that, but if it's appropriate to the question, then fine.
Yeah, I think it is all about appropriacy.
Could I pick up a question about pronunciation? Because I've also seen this in the chat. Sergio is saying, is a C2 candidate expected to speak like a native speaker in terms of accent and accuracy? So in terms of accuracy, some mistakes are still expected even at C2 level, Sergio. So perfection is not expected even at the very highest levels. In fact, native speakers make mistakes too. And in terms of accent, again, accent is not an important issue. The important thing in terms of pronunciation, including at the highest levels, is intelligibility. Can you be easily understood? And also, how do you use the features of pronunciation, like we mentioned, stressed and unstressed sounds, the schwa, intonation, word stress, and so on. So everybody has an accent. I've got an accent, Sangeeta, Rosalia. We all have accents, and that's fine. We're not looking to remove the accent of the student. They bring their
Accents are
accent
wonderful.
with them. Yeah, absolutely. We just make sure they can be easily understood and they're using those features.
And continuing on from that, Lizette has also asked about pronunciation and what kind of activities can you apply in class. I'm not going to talk about the activities, but just to say that within the speaking guides, there are lots of really nice activities, longer activities and shorter mini activities that will help you develop different aspects of pronunciation. And I think it's worth looking at not only the levels that you teach, but potentially the levels around them, because some of those activities, those shorter activities, will be equally effective for different levels. Obviously, we couldn't put everything in every guide. So if you're looking for specific activities, look in each of the 5 guides. You'll find some really useful stuff, I think.
Yeah, good tip.
Okay. Speaking about the speaking test, any differences between first and first for schools?
I mean, the differences are in the topics. That is the difference between first and first for schools. First for schools is designed for candidates of school age, so the topics are more tailored to the kinds of areas such as school and family life that they'll be more familiar with. But in terms of level, the criteria is exactly the same. So in terms of language production, the level that's expected is exactly the same.
Thank you, Claire and Sangeeta. This is the end of the session. Thanks again to Claire Ross and Sangeeta Latte for all the interesting ideas, a brilliant session, really. And thanks to all of you who joined us today for the Assessing Speaking Skills for B2 First for Schools, C1 Advanced, and C2 Proficiency. We hope you can join us for the next webinar next time on developing oracy in the primary classroom. Thank you all and goodbye.